Donald Trump's recurring demand for a Chicago crackdown, often involving the deployment of federal agents or the National Guard, is a highly publicized, politically charged response to the city's persistent gun violence, recently amplified by high-profile deadly shootings. This call is rooted in the belief that the city's crime problem is too severe for local authorities alone to handle, necessitating a forceful, top-down federal intervention to restore law and order. However, this approach is highly divisive. While proponents view it as a necessary measure for immediate stabilization and disrupting organized criminal networks, critics argue that such military-style interventions are an overreach that violates local governance, undermines community trust, and risks escalating violence and civil rights abuses. Past attempts to deploy federal assets have been met with legal challenges and resistance from Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, who view the move as an attack on state autonomy and a political distraction from the need for long-term community investments. Reasons for the proposal. The primary reasons behind the call for federal intervention stem from stark statistics and political strategy. 1. Elevated crime rates. Despite overall national trends, Chicago continues to struggle with stubbornly high murder and non-fatal shooting rates, concentrated in specific, underserved neighborhoods. Proponents argue that local police strategies have failed to effectively address the crisis. 2. Disruption of criminal networks. Federal agencies like the FBI, DEA, and ATF possess superior resources, intelligence, and jurisdiction to target cross-state gun trafficking and complex gang leadership that local police cannot easily reach. A crackdown is intended to surgically dismantle these organizations. 3. Political posturing. For political figures like Trump, the emphasis on crime in Democratic-led cities like Chicago serves as a powerful campaign narrative, framing the situation as a failure of liberal governance and emphasizing a strong, decisive stance on public safety. Consequences of federal deployment. A forceful federal deployment, such as the one repeatedly threatened, carries several significant consequences, many of which have been observed in past limited deployments. 4. Erosion of community trust. The presence of militarized, often masked, federal agents using aggressive tactics severely damages the fragile trust between residents and law enforcement. This breakdown makes residents less likely to report crimes, cooperate with investigations, or call 911, ultimately making the community less safe and hindering the prosecution of violent offenders. 5. Legal and constitutional challenges. Deploying National Guard troops for local law enforcement purposes against the will of the state's governor raises serious legal questions regarding the separation of powers and the Posse Comitatus Act. Federal courts have often become the battleground for these challenges, sometimes delaying or halting deployments. Number 6. Diversion of resources. As seen in previous federal operations, community violence intervention groups, who rely on trust to de-escalate conflicts, are often forced to shift their limited resources away from gun violence prevention toward immigrant justice and legal advocacy to protect residents from aggressive federal tactics. 7. Escalation of tensions. Military-style operations, especially when perceived as an occupation, can lead to protests, standoffs, and increased instances of use of force, potentially exacerbating social and racial tensions within the city. Prediction and solutions. Prediction. Given the deep political and legal polarization surrounding the issue, federal interventions into Chicago's crime problem are likely to remain limited, temporary, and subject to intense legal scrutiny. Any attempted large-scale deployment will face immediate lawsuits and fierce political opposition, ensuring that it remains a divisive political talking point rather than a sustained, unified law enforcement strategy. Solutions. Effective and lasting reduction in Chicago's violence requires a dual approach that moves beyond temporary crackdowns toward comprehensive community-based strategies. 8. Sustained Community-Based Violence Intervention, CBI. This involves robust funding for non-law enforcement organizations like Chicago CRED that employ violence interrupters and street outreach workers. These individuals, often with lived experience, intervene in conflicts before they become deadly and provide mentorship, job training, and educational opportunities to high-risk individuals. 9. Targeted gun policy and supply chain disruption. implementing common-sense gun safety measures, strengthening background checks, and focusing state and federal resources on cracking down on the flow of illegal guns from outside Illinois, the primary source of crime weapons, is critical. 10. Addressing root causes. Long-term solutions demand massive, sustained investment in the most impacted neighborhoods. This includes improving failing schools, creating stable employment pathways, ensuring access to mental health services, and tackling housing instability, factors that generate the desperation and environment where gang violence takes root. The most successful pathway forward blends targeted, legitimate law enforcement efforts focused on dismantling organized crime with deep, long-term, public health-style investments in prevention and opportunity within the communities most affected.